Hello, everyone. Today we're diving into a story that feels like something straight out of Hollywood, except this time, it's not a fairy tale. What began as what looked like an act of forgiveness quickly spiraled into a public spectacle and an explosive scandal surrounding Emma Watson. What was supposed to be a moment of reconciliation has instead turned into a brutal takedown, one that has the whole world watching in shock. You see, Rowling, the woman who for years kept her silence while her on-screen children, the stars who rose to fame because of her creation, openly criticized her, has finally broken that silence. And when she struck back at Emma Watson after the actress's so-called emotional confession, the impact was devastating. This wasn't just a reply. This was Rowling completely dismantling the carefully polished image of her former protege. She exposed contradictions, hidden agendas, and a side of Emma that had been protected for years behind the image of a UN Goodwill ambassador. What we're witnessing is no longer a behind-the-scenes disagreement. This is now a full-scale celebrity battle, one playing out under the spotlight for the entire world. And tonight, we're going to break it all down. To really understand this fallout, we need to rewind a little. Since 2020, J.K. Rowling has been the target of fierce backlash. Canceled, many say, largely over her personal views on gender and trans issues. And what made it sting even more was that the backlash wasn't only from fans, but also from the very actors she helped turn into household names. Emma Watson, the once beloved Hermione Granger, was one of the loudest voices speaking out against her. But what truly stunned people was Emma's sudden shift in tone just recently. Out of nowhere, she appeared in an emotional podcast interview, shedding tears and speaking warmly about Rowling, the very person she had distanced herself from for years. She claimed you can still care deeply about people, even if you disagree with their views, and that Rowling could never truly be erased from her life. On the surface, it sounded touching, even noble. But behind that tearful monologue, another storm was brewing. Only days after the podcast went live, controversy erupted. The team behind the Jay Shetty podcast was accused of aggressively censoring comments, especially any that called out Watson's years of silence or pointed to the sudden, suspicious timing of her so-called change of heart. Critical voices disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only glowing praise. To many observers, it felt less like genuine support for Emma and more like a deliberate attempt to rewrite the narrative, casting her as a misunderstood victim or a reformed soul, rather than someone carefully managing her public image. The truth is, Emma Watson's career hasn't exactly been thriving in recent years. Her last major film role was all the way back in 2019. Since then, she's described her absence as a break from acting, but to many in Hollywood, it looks more like an involuntary retreat. After Harry Potter, Emma struggled to secure a lasting place in the ever-changing film industry. Of course, some fans argue this point is still up for debate, but it's hard to ignore how quiet her career has become. Meanwhile, J.K. Rowling couldn't just sit back as these revelations and shifting narratives swirled around her. At first, she kept her response subtle, sharing a parody video that openly mocked Emma's emotional interview. The video highlighted the strange contrast between Emma's so-called confession of love for Rowling and her ongoing support for people who had publicly wished Rowling the worst, even calling for harm against her. But make no mistake, that was only the opening shot. After years of biting her tongue, ignoring criticism from the very stars she helped catapult into fame, Rowling finally decided enough was enough. Her patience had run dry. This time, she came forward with a direct and devastating reply. She released a lengthy statement, one aimed specifically at Emma Watson. And it wasn't a vague, generalized remark. It was personal, sharp, and unflinchingly honest. Rowling laid everything bare, addressing the hypocrisy she saw, and refusing to let the carefully curated image of her former protege shield her anymore. And then came what many fans are calling the death sentence for Hermione's reputation. Rowling finally broke her silence in a statement that left no room for misinterpretation. She wrote, and I quote in essence, "I keep seeing people talk about this, so let me be clear. No actor who's ever portrayed one of my characters is under some lifelong obligation to agree with me on every issue. That would be absurd. Emma Watson and her fellow cast members are free to support gender identity ideology, That's their right. It's legally protected. And I would never want anyone threatening them with violence, harassment, or the loss of work because of their beliefs. But then Rowling's tone sharpened, especially when addressing Emma and Daniel Radcliffe directly. She continued, "What troubles me is the way Emma and Daniel have treated our old professional bond as if it gives them authority over me, or worse, some kind of duty to publicly denounce my views. Years after the Harry Potter films ended, they still speak as though they're official representatives of the world I created." And perhaps the most revealing part of her statement was this personal admission. When you've known people since they were children, 10 years old in Emma's case, it's difficult to silence that protective instinct. For many years, I deliberately avoided commenting on her, especially during the time when I was locked in legal battles of my own. This wasn't just a statement, it was a direct dismantling of Emma Watson's credibility, and a rare moment where Rowling chose to peel back the curtain and reveal her personal disappointment. Rowling didn't stop there. In fact, her words only grew sharper and more personal. She reminded everyone of where she came from, saying, "I wasn't living in luxury at 14. I wasn't a multimillionaire. I was struggling in poverty while writing the very book that eventually gave Emma her fame. And because of that, I understand better than most what it means when women's rights are stripped away. The painful irony is that Emma, who enjoyed every privilege my work gave her, has actively supported movements that have, in my view, weakened those rights for women and girls." And then Rowling turned to the heart of the matter, Emma's sudden display of affection. She wrote, "The greatest irony is this. If Emma hadn't suddenly declared in her interview that she values and loves me, a statement I strongly suspect was made because attacking me isn't trendy anymore, I might never have spoken so openly. But adults can't play both sides. You can't embrace an activist cause that frequently calls for my destruction, and then in the same breath expect my unconditional love, as though I were some kind of mother figure." Finally, Rowling delivered the line that many say sealed the fate of this feud. "Emma has every right to disagree with me. She can express her feelings about me publicly if she wishes. But I also have that right, and after years of silence, I decided it was time to finally use it." This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a final declaration, a moment where Rowling stripped away restraint and made it clear she would no longer stay silent while her so-called protégés shaped the public narrative unchallenged. To call this exchange a simple criticism would be far too mild. What Rowling delivered was nothing short of a total demolition of Emma Watson's image. She didn't just disagree. She accused Emma of hypocrisy, of being out of touch, and of speaking from a place of privilege that shielded her from the struggles ordinary women endure every day. Rowling contrasted her own years of hardship with Emma's comfortable rise to fame, making it clear she believes Watson has no understanding of the realities faced by those whose rights she claims to defend. And now, nobody knows how Emma can possibly respond. Her position looks weaker than ever. To Rowling's loyal supporters, she's an ungrateful betrayer who turned her back on the woman who gave her a career. But to the very activist groups she aligned herself with, Emma is now seen as a coward, someone who backpedaled when the fight got tough. The whispers from inside the Harry Potter circle only make things worse. Rumors suggest even Daniel Radcliffe and Rupert Grint were furious with Emma's sudden change of tone. After all, they had stood united in their criticism of Rowling, and now it looks like Emma's wavering has left her stranded, isolated on both sides. Her attempt to appear as a wise peacemaker, someone above the conflict, has backfired spectacularly. Instead of maturity, it revealed privilege. Instead of strength, it showed detachment. And perhaps Emma never imagined that what was meant to be a heartfelt confession would explode into a scandal of this scale. Where she goes from here is anyone's guess. Will she fight back or retreat further into silence?